The wind howled across the cliffs, carrying with it the scent of sulphur and memories. Elias stood at the edge, his coat flapping against the bitter chill, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sea met the sky. Every evening, for 7 years, he came here. The same spot, the same time, the same ache in his chest. He waited. He always waited. The townsfolk called him a fool, whispered that he clung to a ghost, but Elias didn't care. His heart was tethered to her, to Leila, and no amount of time or scorn could sever that bond. Leila was a firestorm of a woman, all laughter and defiance, with eyes that sparkled like the ocean under a summer sun. They'd met a decade ago, when Elias was just a fisherman's son, hauling nets under a blistering sky. She'd been passing through the coastal village, a painter with a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her hair a wild cascade of chestnut curls. She'd stopped to sketch the boats bobbing in the harbor, and Elias, old in a way he'd never been, offered to carry her easel. That was the start of days of stolen glances, nights of whispered dreams under the stars, and a love that felt like it could outlast the tides. But love, Elias learned, was no match for fate. Leila's family had plans for her, a life far from the rugged cliffs and salty air. They wanted her in the city, married to a man with a name that carried weight, not some fisherman's son with calloused hands and a heart too big for his own good. She fought them. Oh, how she fought. Leila's spirit was a tempest, unyielding, but her father's will was iron. One night, under the cover of darkness, they took her away. Elias woke to an empty village square, her easel gone, her laughter silenced. All she left was a note, scrawled in her hurried hand, "I'll come back, Elias. Wait for me. I believe in us." So, he waited. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months, months to years. The village changed and new faces, new boats, new storms, but Elias remained, a constant against the shifting tides. He took up work at the docks, his hands growing rougher, his eyes growing wearier, but his heart never wavered. Every evening, he climbed the cliffs, stood at their spot, and searched the horizon for a sign of her. The townsfolk pitied him at first, then mocked him, then ignored him. "She's gone, lad," they'd say. "Move on." But Elias couldn't move on. Her note was his anchor, her words his lighthouse. Leila, meanwhile, was a world away. The city was a cage of glass and steel, its streets suffocating under the weight of expectations. Her family had married her off to a man named Victor, a banker with cold eyes and colder hands. He was everything Elias wasn't: a polished, calculated, devoid of warmth. Leila tried to paint, to lose herself in the colors and shapes that once brought her joy, but Victor disapproved. "Art is a childish fancy," he'd say, his voice sharp as a blade. So, her brushes gathered dust, and her spirit withered under the weight of a life she hadn't chosen. But Leila never forgot Elias. His face haunted her dreams, his voice echoed in her quiet moments. She clung to the memory of their cliffside promises, to the belief that love like theirs couldn't be extinguished. She wrote letters she never sent, pouring her heart onto pages she hid beneath floorboards. "I'm still yours," she'd write, tears blurring the ink. "I'm coming back." But Victor's shadow loomed large, and her family's grip was unrelenting. Leaving wasn't as simple as walking away, it meant defying a world that demanded her obedience. Years passed, and the distance between them grew, not just in miles but in the lives they led. Elias, now 30, was a man carved by time and longing. His once boyish face was lined with the weight of waiting, his hands scarred from years at sea. Yet, he never stopped climbing the cliffs. The villagers no longer spoke of him. He was a fixture, like the lighthouse or the gnarled oak by the harbor. But inside, his hope flickered, fragile but alive. He traced the words of her note, now worn and greased from years, in his pocket: "I believe in us." And so, he believed too. Leila, now 29, was a ghost of herself. The city had dulled her fire, but it hadn't snuffed it out. Victor's indifference had turned to cruelty, his words cutting deeper than any storm. One night, After a particularly brutal argument, Leela stood in their sterile apartment, staring at a canvas she hadn't touched in years. Her hands trembled as she picked up a brush, and with one stroke, something inside her snapped awake. She painted the cliffs, the sea, Elias's eyes, everything she'd lost. And in that moment, she knew she couldn't stay. Not anymore. Leaving Victor was a war. He raged, threatened, pleaded, but Leela's resolve was steel. She packed a single bag, her paints, and the memory of Elias's warmth. The city fought to keep her family's disapproval, Victor's lawyers, the weight of societal expectation, but Leela was done bending. She boarded a train at dawn, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and hope. The journey back to the coast was long, the miles stretching like years, but with every passing field, she felt herself becoming whole again. Elias didn't know she was coming. He stood on the cliffs that evening, the same as always, the wind biting at his skin. The sea was restless, waves crashing against the rocks below, mirroring the turmoil in his chest. 7 years was a long time to wait, and doubt had begun to creep in, whispering that she'd forgotten, that she'd moved on. But then, he saw a figure in the distance, moving up the winding path to the cliffs. His breath caught, his heart a drum against his ribs. It couldn't be. Not after all this time. Leela's legs burned as she climbed, her bag heavy on her shoulder, her heart heavier still. She dreamed of this moment, rehearsed it 1,000 times, but now that it was here, fear gripped her. What if he'd changed? What if he hadn't waited? What if the boy she loved was gone? But then she saw him, Elias, standing tall against the wind, his silhouette unmistakable. Her steps quickened, her breath hitching as she called his name. He turned, and time stopped. The world narrowed to the space between them, the years melting away. Her eyes were the same, bright and fierce, though shadowed with pain. His were steady, unwavering, filled with a love that hadn't dimmed. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Leela dropped her bag and ran, crashing into his arms, and Elias held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. They stood there, wrapped in each other, the wind howling around them, the sea roaring below. "I believed," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I always believed." "I waited," he said, his words a vow. "I'll always wait." The village woke the next morning to a sight they hadn't seen in years, Elias, smiling, walking hand in hand with Leela through the harbor. The townsfolk stared, some in awe, some in disbelief, but none could deny the light in their eyes. Leela's easel was back in the square, her paints vivid against the canvas, capturing the sea, the cliffs, the man who'd never stopped waiting. Elias worked the docks, but now his laughter echoed across the water, a sound the village had forgotten. Their love wasn't perfect. The years had left scars of doubt, fear, the weight of time apart. But they faced it together, rebuilding what had been stolen. Leela painted, her art's rebellion against the life she'd escaped. Elias fished, his hands steady, his heart full. They spent evenings on the cliffs, not waiting anymore, but living a truly living. The village, once skeptical, began to believe too. Stories of Elias and Leela spread, carried by travelers, whispered in taverns, written in letters. Their love became a legend, a testament to what happens when you wait, when you believe, when you refuse to let go. And as the years passed, the cliffs stood witness to their story, the sea singing their names, the wind carrying their promise. He waited, she believed.